December 17, 1944. In the Ardennes Forest of Belgium, Oberleutnant Hans Müller scribbled despairing entries in his diary from within a frigid trench. He wrote about how American artillery differed starkly from its Russian counterpart. It wasn't merely the sheer volume of fire that was terrifying, it was the speed and precision that struck without warning. From silence to chaos, the landscape transformed instantly as shells rained down with pinpoint accuracy. That morning, through a thick fog, Müller had seen evidence of a revolution in warfare. His battalion, part of Hitler's final Western offensive spearheaded by the 6th Panzer Army, had caught the Americans off guard at thinly defended positions. Victory seemed imminent. But then American artillery intervened, shattering German expectations about American military prowess. What Müller could not have known is that his unit was facing an artillery system unparalleled in history, so advanced and devastatingly effective that it would soon bring Germany's last offensive to a halt. This revelation of American superiority had been building throughout 1943 and 1944 as German veterans shifted from the Eastern Front to confront American forces across Italy, France, and Belgium. Having endured Russian artillery barrages on the Eastern Front, these soldiers brought with them hard-won survival tactics, yet found themselves unprepared for the sophistication of American firepower. The Russians would typically launch ranging shots that gave German soldiers valuable seconds to seek cover. The shells followed predictable trajectories, allowing for movement between barges. However, the fire direction process was often slow, requiring 10 to 15 minutes from observation to impact. In contrast, the Americans were strikingly different. Gapper Otto Schmidt, a veteran who had spent 2 years on the Eastern Front before being captured with the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943, recounted his first encounter with American artillery during a post-war interview. Our position was in a wadi north of Tunis, which we believed offered good cover. We estimated that Russian forces would need an hour to locate us and another hour to calibrate their guns. This gave us the confidence to heat up our morning coffee. Suddenly, a small aircraft appeared overhead, no larger than a reconnaissance plane, at approximately 500 meters altitude. Initially, it garnered a little attention as such aircraft were not known for carrying weapons. We presumed it was conducting photography. Yet, 3 minutes later, and without any warning signs like ranging shots, the entire wadi exploded in chaos. Shells landed simultaneously rather than sequentially, causing air bursts above us and ground bursts among our ranks. Within 30 seconds, my company was no longer capable of fighting as a cohesive unit. Of the original 123 men, only 11 survived. The aircraft Schmidt observed turned out to be an L-4 Grasshopper, serving as an American forward observer platform. These seemingly unassuming Piper Cubs would come to instill fear among German troops and become known as one of their most traded aerial assets. The real threat did not come from the weapons themselves, but from what happened after they appeared. German soldiers quickly learned an unpleasant reality. Spotting a Grasshopper overhead meant they had mere seconds or at most a few minutes before being targeted by American artillery, turning their position into a deadly area. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, who coordinated counter battery fire on the Eastern Front and later documented his experiences in letters found in German military archives decades later, expressed his astonishment. Initially, I thought the captured documents detailing American artillery procedures were merely propaganda designed to instill fear and disbelief. Such precision seemed impossible for any artillery system to achieve. However, after witnessing an MRT's American Grasshopper near Sino, my skepticism vanished. We tracked its movements and prepared to relocate our guns as standard protocol. But before we could complete the relocation or even compute counter battery fire data, American shells were already raining down on us with pinpoint accuracy. This was not random firing, but meticulously coordinated strikes hitting each gun individually. They had calculated firing solutions so swiftly that their forward observers could relay map coordinates to the fire direction center faster than our own artillery could respond. The key to this superiority lay in a comprehensive system integrating technology, training, and industrial capacity far surpassing anything Germany could match. At its core was the Central Fire Direction Center (FFDC), where American batteries shared all data for coordinated strikes from multiple units simultaneously. Unlike German batteries that calculated firing solutions independently, American artillery relied on a centralized FDC to orchestrate simultaneous fire from dozens of guns. This system hinged on pre-computed firing tables meticulously crafted by teams in offices across the United States. These rooms were filled with women using mechanical calculators, slide rules, and logarithm tables to compute every conceivable firing solution based on variables like wind speed, temperature, humidity, barrel wear, propellant condition, and altitude differences between gun and target. The result was a set of books small enough to carry in a map case, enabling American fire direction officers to calculate precise firing solutions within minutes instead of hours. Headman Vera Hoffman, a mathematics professor drafted into the Wehrmacht's artillery division, meticulously analyzed seized American firing tables following the conflict. His findings, documented within German military archives, revealed his profound amazement at the sheer scale and precision of the work involved. These tables were the result of years of intensive computational efforts involving thousands of hours spent on mechanical calculators. They contained pre-calculated solutions for every conceivable variable one might encounter in combat situations. In contrast, our own firing tables appeared rudimentary, necessitating extensive field calculations for each operation. The Americans had done all the necessary mathematical groundwork beforehand, allowing them to look up answers quickly during battles. However, merely possessing detailed firing tables did not fully explain the remarkable effectiveness of American artillery. The true innovation lay in the use of time on targets at 2OT, a sophisticated firing technique that only a few nations could effectively implement. This method involved coordinating fire from multiple batteries so that shells arrived simultaneously within a 3-second window, regardless of distance to the target. The impact was devastating. German troops experienced no warning or preliminary ranging shots. Instead, an instant transition from silence to simultaneous detonations of dozens of shells. Troops caught in the open had no time to react. Survival against conventional artillery often depended on dropping prone at the first explosion, but this technique left them vulnerable to TOT's sudden onslaught. Post-war studies showed that 66% of artillery casualties occurred within the initial seconds of a barrage. By eliminating any advance warning, TOT maximized casualties and disrupted enemy operations. Stabsfeld-Welbel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived TOT strikes during the Battle of the Bulge, documented his experiences in a diary found by American forces in a captured command post. In his writings, he noted that it was artillery unlike anything they had previously encountered. This is unprecedented. You hear nothing at first. Then everything comes to an end. Every shell arrives simultaneously. Air bursts claim the lives of those who might have survived ground explosions, while ground blasts take down individuals who could have endured air detonations. There isn't any opportunity to seek refuge by diving, no chance to find a hole, and not even enough time to hit the deck. One moment you're alive, and in the next, you are either injured or deceased. The rapid response of American artillery stunned German commanders. Even with what was thought to be some of the world's finest artillery, Germans needed between 8 to 10 minutes under optimal conditions to deliver fire. In contrast, American artillery frequently achieved precise strikes within just 3 minutes. This remarkable speed was due to several factors. The use of advanced FM radios by American forward observers provided clear and interference-free communication. German forces primarily relied on AM radios, which were often hampered by static. Additionally, the number of radios in American units far exceeded those available to Germans. Each infantry battalion in America had multiple radio-equipped forward observers, whereas a typical German battalion might have just 1 or 2 radios shared between units. Moreover, the training and expertise of the forward observers gave Americans another significant edge. While German forward observers were artillery officers who sometimes lacked infantry experience, American forward observers underwent specialized training to understand both artillery and infantry tactics. They traveled alongside infantry units, shared living quarters with infantry soldiers, and worked closely to coordinate fire as an integral part of combined arms operations. Additionally, American artillery observers had access to a vast corps artillery force, not limited to just their own battalion. This system enabled a single forward observer to direct fire from numerous batteries within minutes. A lieutenant requesting fire support could unleash firepower equivalent to a small airstrike, delivered with greater accuracy and speed than any aerial assault could achieve. Ostenrich Müller, the commander of an infantry regiment decimated near Loh in July 1944, noted this capability in his final report. During one engagement, a single American infantry company surrounded in a village held off my entire regiment for 6 hours. Each time we attempted to launch an assault, artillery fire forced us back. It wasn't just from a single battery, but what appeared to be dozens of batteries. The forward observer with that company, likely a lieutenant or captain, controlled more firepower than I could muster with the entirety of my regimental artillery. Our attempt resulted in the loss of 400 men trying to overwhelm 120 Americans, yet we were unsuccessful. The American artillery pieces themselves highlighted their industrial superiority. The M2A105M howitzer, which served as the standard light artillery piece for the United States, was an engineering marvel and a testament to advanced manufacturing techniques. Rock Island Arsenal had refined production methods that allowed for rapid manufacture with exacting precision. By the end of World War II, a total 8 5.36-2A1 howitzers had been produced. Each American infantry division was equipped with 36 of these howitzers, organized into 3 battalions of 12 guns each. These units were fully motorized and towed by trucks or half-tracks capable of highway speeds. Transitioning from one firing position to another, a process that took German horse-drawn artillery between 2 to 3 hours, could be accomplished in just 20 to 30 minutes by American motorized batteries. The difference in mobility was striking. Throughout the war, German artillery remained predominantly reliant on horses for transportation. Despite Nazi propaganda depicting mechanized panzer divisions, about 80% of Germany's mobile forces depended on horses for transportation. At the start of World War II, Germany had around 4,000 horses, which increased to nearly 200,000 by February 1945. Each artillery piece required 6 to 8 horses and could take hours to set up, move, and reposition, especially in adverse weather conditions. This made movement incredibly challenging. Paul Richter, a Grief writer who served with a German artillery battery in Normandy, documented his experiences in detail throughout the war. He once observed an American artillery unit being redeployed during battle. They fired their rounds, then trucks arrived to move them away. Within 20 minutes, the entire battery was packed up and gone. In contrast, we needed at least 2 hours for such maneuvers, assuming ideal weather conditions and road quality. Under muddy or hazardous circumstances, it could take 4 hours or more. While the Americans set up at a new position and were ready to fire again before our movement concluded, we were essentially fighting with 19th century tactics, using horses against an opponent utilizing 20th century technology such as trucks. The result was predictable. American 155 mm howitzers offered formidable support capabilities. Each division fielded 12 155 mm howitzers in a dedicated battalion, firing shells weighing 43 kg to distances surpassing 14,000 meters. This firepower allowed the division commander to destroy fortifications that smaller caliber weapons could not. Designed in the late 1930s and adopted in May 1941, these guns were engineering marvels combining range, accuracy, and reliability. Over 300 of these howitzers were manufactured during the war. They could be towed at highway speeds by trucks or half-tracks, enabling swift relocation. Their rate of fire was 4 rounds per minute, with well-trained crews occasionally achieving 6 rounds per minute briefly. Despite their substantial divisional assets, they were overshadowed by the artillery available at Corps and Army levels. The typical infantry of U.S. Corps artillery comprised battalions equipped with 155 mm guns, 8-inch howitzers, and even formidable 240 mm howitzers. These weapons had the destructive power to obliterate any fortification and could be summoned by forward observers at battalion level within minutes. This escalation of firepower meant that a single rifle company could quickly call for support from both divisional corps artillery and even army level assets. In contrast, German artillery was organized in a rigid manner. Corps and army artillery were separate commands and required extensive coordination and approval to assist divisional operations, necessitating requests to be routed through multiple headquarters. While German infantry divisions had their own artillery units, requesting fire from corps artillery entailed lengthy procedures that often took hours for clearance. By the time the fire arrived, if it ever did, American forces had typically moved forward and shifted the front lines. Lieutenant Joachim Weber, a forward observer who requested Corps artillery support during the Normandy campaign, vividly recounted his frustration. At 09:15 hours, he urgently called for Corps artillery as enemy tanks were amassing for an assault on his position. He provided precise coordinates and described the target, along with explaining the tactical situation in detail. However, it was not until 13:30 hours, 4 hours later, that he finally received fire. 3 salvos were delivered by then, but the American tanks had already completed their attack and withdrawn, leaving his position vulnerable to enemy forces. Despite surviving through sheer luck, Joachim lamented that the Corps artillery support arrived too late to make a difference. The technical prowess of American artillery extended not only to its weaponry but also to the ammunition itself. While Germany faced challenges with propellant shortages and inconsistent shell production, the United States managed to produce ammunition in seemingly limitless quantities, adhering to strict specifications that guaranteed consistent performance. Of greater importance was the deployment of the variable time fuse, or VT fuse, a technological breakthrough that would prove critical in the conflict. The VT fuse, also known as the proximity fuse, incorporated a miniaturized radar transmitter and receiver housed within the shell's nose. This device emitted a radio signal. Upon nearing an object or terrain, the reflected signal activated detonation at an optimal height for maximum destructive power, usually around 10 to 20 meters above the ground. The VT fuse revolutionized artillery performance. Traditional time fuses necessitated meticulous calculations to determine the exact moment of explosion, which were easily disrupted by factors such as wind, temperature, and barrel wear. Even minor inaccuracies could cause shells to explode too high or bury themselves in the earth before detonating. The introduction of the VT fuse mitigated these issues, ensuring that every shell achieved an optimal airburst irrespective of environmental conditions. The VT fuse saw its combat debut aboard the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, when it successfully shot down a Japanese dive bomber near Guadalcanal with just 2 or 3 salvos. Over the subsequent years of 1943 and 1944, VT fuses demonstrated remarkable efficacy in naval anti-air aircraft operations and against V-1 flying bombs over England. Yet, due to security concerns about the technology falling into enemy hands, its deployment on European ground artillery was initially restricted. General Dwight Eisenhower lobbied vigorously for permission to utilize VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, emphasizing their strategic importance despite potential risks. The Pentagon resisted at first, but eventually conceded following Eisenhower's persistent advocacy. Official approval came between December 19th and 21st, 1944, shortly after the German offensive commenced. This marked the inaugural use of VT fuses against ground forces in Europe. The decision proved beneficial as VT-fused shells decimated exposed German formations during key offensives. Prior naval anti-aircraft tests had already revealed that VT fuses were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional fuses when combating V-1 flying bombs. VT fuses destroyed nearly 79% of all incoming targets. Their lethal fragment area spanned 3,000 square feet compared to just 60 square feet for conventional fuses. Some experts estimated that VT fuses boosted artillery effectiveness by between 200 and 700%. Soldiers who had previously relied on finding low, lying ground to avoid shrapnel learned that VT fuses rendered such tactics useless. The shells would explode above them, sending deadly fragments raining down upon those lying prone in shallow holes. Hans Müller, a writer whose diary began this account, survived an encounter with these demon shells and documented his experience. We had been trained on the Eastern Front to flatten ourselves at the first explosion, finding even slight depressions offered some protection from horizontal shrapnel. But these new fuses detonated above us, showering fragments down like rain. Men in foxholes, who ought to have been safe, were killed by vertical fragments. There was virtually no defense other than deep bunkers, which we had no time to dig. We simply died. The psychological impact of VT fuses further exacerbated their physical effects. German soldiers accustomed to seeking cover upon hearing artillery fire found that this training was now irrelevant. The realization that no amount of ground level protection could save them led to paralysis and inaction. Some units refused orders to move, even when faced with direct commands from superiors, due to the certainty of death if exposed to American artillery fire. Friedrich Bauer reported a near mutiny within his unit during the later stages of the Ardennes offensive. My company was ordered to advance on an American position 300 meters away, but the men refused to comply with the order. They had witnessed firsthand the devastation wrought by American artillery on exposed troops, particularly due to the new air-bursting fuses known as Cumberus. I attempted to convey that we would ultimately face certain death if we did not launch an attack. The Americans were poised to overrun our position eventually. Despite this reasoning, the soldiers remained immobile, choosing to risk capture rather than endure a likely fatal barrage from American artillery. The sheer scale of American industrial output in producing vast quantities of artillery and ammunition was incomprehensible to German troops. Facilities like Rock Island Arsenal alone churned out over 10 50mm howitzers. Numerous factories were dedicated to the production of 155mm howitzers and even larger weapons. Throughout the war, shell production reached astonishing levels. In contrast, German industrial output was severely constrained by Allied bombings, resource scarcity, and inefficiencies in allocating resources. Consequently, their production never matched American standards. Although German artillery pieces often outperformed American models in design quality, they were manufactured in insufficient numbers and lacked the necessary industrial capacity to sustain production as the war progressed. By 1944, many German artillery units found themselves operating at only half strength due to the destruction or wear of the guns and an inability to obtain replacements. More significantly, German ammunition production could not keep pace with intensive operational demands. Often, German artillery batteries were limited to a meager daily allowance of just 2 to 3 shells per gun. In stark contrast, American units faced no such limitations on ammunition use. Forward observers had the freedom to call for fire without reservation, secure in the knowledge that their supply was virtually unlimited. Lieutenant Vervogel, a German artillery officer, chronicled this crisis in his war diary. We received only 50 shells per gun for an entire week. These 50 shells were intended to support an infantry regiment under constant American assault. I had to justify every fire mission at battalion level, explaining why the targeted area warranted the expenditure of irreplaceable ammunition. Meanwhile, American artillery fired thousands of shells daily without regard for conservation. Our conflict was a struggle where underprivileged soldiers faced an enemy well equipped and resourced. This imbalance extended into their tactical approaches, particularly concerning ammunition supply. German artillery strategy prioritized extensive bombardment of high-priority targets after meticulous planning and authorization. In contrast, American tactics favored rapid and responsive fire support for infantry operations. An American platoon leader could typically obtain artillery assistance within minutes, whereas a German counterpart might endure hours or even go without the requested support. Logistical shortcomings further accentuated these differences. American artillery units were fully mechanized, receiving timely resupply from truck convoys capable of delivering large quantities of ammunition to forward positions swiftly. Meanwhile, German artillery relied on horse-drawn transport and often depended on rail networks for long-distance movements, making it challenging to keep adequate stockpiles at the front lines. As Allied air superiority began disrupting German railway systems, their already strained ammunition supply chain faced even greater difficulties. Additionally, American logistics benefited from uniformity in equipment standards. For instance, the M1 fuse used in 105 mm howitzers was interchangeable with those employed by larger calibers such as 155 mm and beyond. This standardization streamlined resupply efforts, reduced inventory needs, and ensured a consistent availability of fuses. In contrast, German ammunition production suffered from multiple fuse designs across various calibers, leading to chronic shortages of specific components despite overall adequate output levels. The superior American artillery capabilities significantly impacted German tactical flexibility. Knowing that concentrating forces would invite overwhelming artillery strikes, German commanders were forced to spread their units thinly. However, this dispersion weakened combat effectiveness and made them vulnerable to piecemeal defeat. Conversely, concentrated forces could generate substantial fighting power but risk becoming primary targets for American artillery fire. Both strategies ultimately led to setbacks. The Battle of the Ardennes, Germany's last significant offensive in the West, starkly illustrated these strategic challenges and their dire consequences. German strategists counted on foggy and cloudy conditions to hinder American air superiority. They accurately recognized that American aircraft were unable to function effectively under poor weather conditions. However, they overlooked the fact that American artillery could still operate regardless of the weather. In the early stages of the offensive, German armored and infantry divisions made substantial inroads against unprepared American forces. Over 200,000 German soldiers and roughly 1,000 tanks launched their initial attack on December 16, 1944. Soon after, American artillery located them. Due to the lack of mobility necessary for quick relocation once targeted, German horse-drawn artillery units were left immobile and destroyed in situ. Depleted ammunition supplies meant that German guns could not sustain counter-battery fire, forcing them to cease firing while American artillery continued unabated. Stabsfeld-Webel Kurt Zimmermann's diary offers detailed insights into the operations of German artillery during this period. His battery was situated south of St. Vith in a wooded area. They had only 50 shells per gun for their entire operation. After conducting a mission in support of infantry, within 10 minutes, American counter-battery fire destroyed 3 out of 6 guns and killed most of the horses. An attempt to move the remaining guns on foot failed due to a lack of horses, so they were abandoned. This scenario was repeated across the front lines. German artillery fell silent while American artillery continued firing continuously. Even at Passau, where American artillery faced ammunition restrictions of just 10 rounds per gun per day by December 27, their firepower remained decisive in repelling German assaults around the encircled town. After the holiday season, when the weather improved, supply lines reopened and American artillery barrages escalated significantly. Throughout the entire Bulge campaign, 455 American guns fired a staggering 155,000 rounds of ammunition. German units that had advanced up to 50 kilometers into Allied territory found themselves encircled and isolated by superior American forces with unrestricted artillery support once resupply operations resumed. Hinrich Müller, whose regiment was annihilated at Stee, 6 months prior, now commanded a fresh unit during the Bulge offensive. His final report, penned from a prisoner of war camp following his capture in January 1945, offers a grim evaluation. "We were overwhelmed by American artillery long before infantry or armor could decisively defeat us." Every maneuver was observed and retaliated against with precise artillery strikes. Any attempt to concentrate forces for an attack was thwarted immediately by the relentless bombardment. Defensive positions were obliterated before Allied troops ever set foot in them. The offensive intended to breach through to Antwerp and sever Allied lines barely lasted a week, undone largely due to American artillery dominance. Units that had begun with full strength ended up suffering 30 to 40% casualties, most of which were inflicted by artillery fire. The insights gained by surviving German soldiers about the destructive power of American artillery came too late to alter the course of the war. Captured and interned in prisoner of war camps across the United States, these soldiers witnessed firsthand the expansive industrial capacity that had supplied their enemy with an abundance of weaponry. Not only did this capability churn out tens of thousands of artillery pieces alongside millions of rounds, but also tanks, aircraft, trucks, and all other military equipment at a rate far surpassing German production. Otto Schmidt, captured in Tunisia and held captive in Texas, penned a letter expressing his observations. "I have seen American industry firsthand. I watched trains laden with hundreds of artillery pieces being transported to ports for deployment overseas. I have witnessed factories churning out shells by the thousands. The Americans did not triumph over us due to superior tactics or better soldiers. Rather, their strategies were sound and their troops courageous. They overwhelmed us with industrial power. For every shell we could fire, they managed to produce and deploy 100. They had the capacity to replace lost equipment quickly while we struggled to keep up. No matter how long the conflict persisted, we were unable to compete with this relentless advantage." German POWs who observed American artillery training sessions in the US gained insight into the professionalism and preparation that underpinned their effectiveness. American artillery units underwent constant training, owning their coordination and communication skills for time-on-target missions. Forward observers worked seamlessly with infantry units, refining the integration that made combined arms operations so formidable. Lieutenant Frederick Bauer, captured during the Italian campaign, attended lectures at a POW camp where American artillery officers detailed their methods. His notes, preserved in German archives, convey his professional respect. "They have turned everything we relied on individual skill and initiative for into systematic processes. While we depended on experienced and talented artillery officers to calculate firing solutions, they devised tables that enabled average officers to achieve similar results. Similarly, where we required skilled radio operators to maintain communications under challenging conditions, they developed reliable radios accessible even to minimally trained personnel. They have transformed the art of artillery into an industrial process, making it replicable and scalable. This is the key to their success." The experiences of German prisoners went beyond technical admiration. Many came to realize that the propaganda portraying American military weakness was entirely false. Both on the battlefield as enemies and in prison camps as captives, they encountered Americans who demonstrated superior professional competence, industrial prowess, and organizational skill across nearly every aspect of military operations. Oberia writer Hans Müller, whose diary documented his time in the Ardennes, was taken prisoner during the collapse of the German offensive. His later diary entries, penned while he was a prisoner of war, reveal a dramatic shift from his former convictions. He recalled being informed that Americans were inferior soldiers, lacking both fighting spirit and the skill and courage possessed by German troops. However, these claims turned out to be false. American soldiers exhibited remarkable bravery and competence on the battlefield, complemented by their overwhelming material advantages, which Germany could not match despite its own valiant efforts. Most crucially, they wielded an advanced artillery system that left our forces without a suitable response. By early 1945, as Germany's prospects became increasingly bleak, American artillery superiority continued to escalate. The production of German ammunition plummeted due to relentless Allied bombing raids. artillery units suffered heavy losses and struggled to replace skilled personnel effectively. Additionally, countless horses vital for transporting artillery were casualties of overwork, malnutrition, and enemy fire. What had started as batteries with 6 guns dwindled to 2 or 3 operational pieces per unit. Some divisions found themselves without any functional artillery at all. In contrast, American artillery forces grew stronger daily. Factories ramped up production at unprecedented rate, surpassing previous yearly totals in 1944 alone. Ammunition output soared, enabling unrestricted use by American troops. Innovations such as improved fire direction systems, computers, and enhanced radio communications further augmented their firepower. The war concluded with Germany's unconditional surrender on May 1945, marked by the overwhelming dominance of American artillery capabilities in the final battles. Single battalions could unleash unprecedented levels of firepower at will. Multiple corps artillery units could synchronize their firepower over broad areas, blanketing entire map grid squares with a barrage of shells. Forward observers were able to direct destructive fire onto any designated target within minutes, assured that precise and swift strikes would follow their orders. German survivors from these final conflicts held deep respect for American artillery capabilities. Hedman Vera Hoffman, the mathematics professor who had meticulously analyzed American firing tables, was captured in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945. His last military report, prepared for American intelligence officials, offered a professional assessment of the effectiveness of American artillery. The American artillery system epitomizes the pinnacle of industrial-age warfare. By applying industrial methodologies, mass production techniques, standardization practices, and systematic training programs, they created an unparalleled weapon system. While individual German artillery pieces might be superior in design and individual officers may match their American counterparts in skill, the Americans developed a system that did not rely on the superiority of individuals. This system generated consistent, overwhelming, and rapid firepower irrespective of individual proficiency levels. This standardization marked a revolutionary shift in warfare that Germany could neither achieve nor overcome due to its industrial constraints. In the decades following the war, historians examining American military effectiveness during World War II frequently highlighted artillery as perhaps the single most crucial advantage possessed by U.S. forces. Although tanks and aircraft garnered significant public attention, it was artillery that halted German offensives, facilitated American advances, and inflicted heavy casualties in the Western theater. German military analysts studying their defeat post-war consistently pointed to American artillery superiority as a decisive factor. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, noted in his post-war analysis, "American artillery accomplished what we thought was impossible. They transformed artillery from a supporting arm into an overwhelming weapon system. Their coordination, fire control, logistics, and industrial production created an artillery force that could not be matched or countered." German forces in the West faced constant threats from American artillery, unable to mass their own troops without drawing devastating fire, unable to move without being observed, and unable to fight effectively under the relentless barrage of shells. The tactical innovations pioneered by American artillery during World War II laid the foundation for modern artillery doctrine, with time on target remaining the standard method for coordinating artillery fires. Fire direction centers continue to serve as the nerve center for artillery operations. Forward observers closely integrated with maneuver units are crucial for providing timely fire support. The basic framework established by the United States during World War II still exists today. The proximity fuse was so revolutionary that its full impact remained classified long after the war ended. The psychological and physical toll often shattered unit cohesion entirely. German soldiers caught in the open by VT-fused shells had no effective defense against American artillery. This experience left indelible impressions on them. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived multiple engagements during the Battle of the Bulge, immigrated to the United States in the 1950s. In a 1960 interview, he reflected on his wartime experiences. When asked what weapon he feared most during the war, he replied that it was not tanks, though German tanks were inferior to late war American models, nor aircraft despite overwhelming American air power. It wasn't even American infantry who fought valiantly. The weapon he feared most, the one that caused him nightmares then and sometimes still does today, was American artillery. Its sudden, devastating fire that arrived without warning was a source of true terror. You might die without ever seeing your enemy, killed by shells fired from guns kilometers away. This story illustrates the transformation of warfare in the industrial age, where individual bravery and tactical skill were overshadowed by industrial production, systematic training, and organizational efficiency. The Americans developed a system that enhanced the capabilities of their average soldiers, making them more effective than exceptional German troops fighting with inferior systems and inadequate support. The artillery that devastated German forces during World War II was not the result of a singular breakthrough or an individual's genius. Instead, it emerged from thorough analysis, industrial application, extensive training, and ample resources. This artillery exemplified the pinnacle of American military prowess, leveraging industrial capacity and organizational acumen to generate overwhelming combat effectiveness. For German soldiers who encountered this formidable system, their experience was profoundly transformative. They began the war with a belief in Germany's superiority. By the end, they recognized that American industrial strength and organizational skill had outstripped those of Germany. Ultimately, they came to fear American artillery more than any other weapon, as it starkly highlighted the unbridgeable gap between German methods and American capabilities.